Medieval dungeons weren't just physical structures, they were entire societies rotting in the dark. Beneath castles and cities, these subterranean nightmares developed their own twisted order, hierarchies, survival economies, and rules forged in desperation. To understand the full scale of medieval cruelty, you had to see not just how people were punished, but how they adapted to living inside a system built to dehumanize them. Dungeon populations were strictly divided by class, crime, and the ability to pay bribes. At the top were valuable political prisoners, captured nobles, rivalets, and important knights. These weren't tortured, they were investments. They received private cells, clean straw once a month, and daily rations of bread and water. Their treatment reflected their economic value. They were kept alive for ransom. One of the most famous examples is Richard the Lionheart, captured in Germany on his way back from the Crusades. Held for 2 years, he lived in relative comfort while his mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, raised the enormous ransom demanded by Emperor Henry VI. His captivity wasn't punishment. It was business. The suffering was precisely measured, enough pressure to encourage payment, but not enough to kill the prize. But for the rest, debtors, dissenters, common criminals, survival was a coin toss. Cells built for 5 often held 20. There was no privacy, no sanitation, no consistent food. Bread was moldy, water polluted. Feces and filth lined the walls. Life expectancy was often just weeks. And their deaths weren't tragedies. They were administrative conveniences. Heretics and accused witches suffered even worse. They weren't just imprisoned. They were purified through agony. Torture wasn't punishment. It was mercy. That's what medieval theologians told themselves. Pain was a fire that burned away spiritual corruption. It was better to suffer now than burn in hell forever. This belief made the psychological trauma far worse. Imagine being tortured by someone who sincerely believed they were saving your soul. Confessions weren't just coerced. They were extracted in the name of divine love. It twisted the mind, eroding hope until only madness remained. Children were subjected to the same horrors. Orphans, pickpockets, runaways, tossed into the same filth-ridden cells as adult thieves, murderers, and predators. Mortality rates for imprisoned children reached 95% in the first month. Those who lived longer often did so by becoming servants or sex slaves to stronger inmates. They bartered their dignity for crumbs of bread and scraps of safety. Inside these dungeons, a brutal survival economy took root. Guards, underpaid and unscrupulous, sold everything: clean as straw, drinkable water, extra food. Families outside often went bankrupt trying to keep loved ones alive inside. Corruption wasn't hidden. It was a system. Prisoners developed their own caste structure based on survival time, strength, and connections. Those who lasted months became informal leaders, controlling information, hoarding food, and commanding fare. Newcomers were prey. They were robbed, beaten, stripped of clothes, and psychologically broken by both guards and inmates. Sexual violence was widespread in mixed-gender dungeons. Women were raped routinely by guards, male prisoners, and sometimes even other women asserting dominance. Pregnancy meant death. There were no midwives, no clean water, no medicine. Most women died during childbirth, and their babies, if they survived birth at all, rarely lived more than a few days. Prisoners adapted mentally in horrific ways. Some withdrew completely, entering a catatonic state, as if their minds had shut off to escape the physical world. Others retreated into fantasy, imagining better lives, pretending they were somewhere else. Many clung to extreme religious visions, convinced their suffering were holy. But the most disturbing transformation was moral. To survive, inmates often became perpetrators. They beat weaker prisoners, stole from the dying, informed on others for tiny benefits, a crust of bread, one day without a beating. The dungeon system corrupted not only bodies, but souls. It stripped away every shred of human decency, replacing it with primal desperation. And yet, torture wasn't the most common killer in these dark depths. The real executioner was disease. Dungeons were perfect breeding grounds for plague, lice, parasites, and every imaginable infection. Overcrowding, filth, starvation, and stagnant water made them biological death traps. The Black Death, 1347 to 1351, tore through Europe, killing up to 200 million people. But dungeon populations were especially doomed. They couldn't flee, clean themselves, or escape infected air. Plague symptoms, fevers, boils, vomiting, delirium, spread within days. In many cells, entire populations died within a week. Typhus, spread by lice, was so common in prisons it was nicknamed jail fever. It caused high fever, intense rashes, and hallucinations. Most victims died within 2 weeks. Dysentery was even more frequent, caused by drinking water contaminated with feces. It led to bloody diarrhea, dehydration, and death. Entire cells could be wiped out. Tuberculosis thrived in tight, unventilated spaces. Spread by coughing, it was slow but relentless. Inmates wasted away over months, coughing blood, rotting from the inside. Malnutrition finished what disease started. Rations were engineered to keep prisoners alive just long enough to extract value, confession, forced labor, or ransom. Prisoners lived on rancid bread, watery gruel, and infested water. The result, scurvy, beriberi, and kwashiorkor. Bodies fell apart. Gums bled. Teeth fell out. Old wounds reopened. Gangrene was rampant. Wounds, left untreated, festered. The smell of rot filled the cells. Flies covered infected flesh. Antibiotics didn't exist. Once rot set in, death followed. The only disposal method? Drag the body out once a week. If anyone remembered, bodies were dumped into mass graves or fed to pigs. No names, no rights, no records. The survivors knew they were next. This anticipatory grief destroyed mental stability. Some prisoners deliberately exposed themselves to sick inmates to die faster. Others stopped eating, hoping starvation would end their agony. What's most horrifying? Disease was often used as a weapon. Overcrowding wasn't an oversight. It was policy. Contaminated water wasn't a mistake. It was a cost-saving measure. Authorities knew prisoners would die. They just didn't care. Torture, when it happened, was refined and ritualized. Not mindless violence, but structured agony crafted by professionals. Heresy and witchcraft warranted the worst. The strappado, hoisting victims by tied arms behind their backs and dropping them, dislocated shoulders, torn muscles. The pain was endless, but rarely fatal. That was the point. The Spanish boot crushed legs between iron plates. Screws tightened slowly, shattering bones. Victims screamed, fainted, begged, and confessed. The sound of bone cracking was meant to break witnesses as much as prisoners. Political crimes demanded spectacle. Drawing and quartering was performance. Dragged through streets, hanged until half dead, disemboweled while alive, then cut into 4. Every stage was symbolic. A ritual destruction of identity. Flaying, skinning someone alive, was reserved for those who truly defied the state. Done slowly, it could take hours. Victims remained conscious as layers were peeled away. It wasn't just punishment, it was erasure. The brazen bull was pure psychological horror. A hollow bronze sculpture, victims were locked inside and roasted alive. Chambers inside converted screams into bull-like moans. They died unheard, unknown, reduced to sound and smoke. 4 moral crimes: adultery, homosexuality, prostitution. Humiliation mattered as much as pain. The pillory held victims in place while crowds hurled filth, insults, and stones. Public shame lasted longer than bruises. The ducking stool punished scolds, women who spoke too loudly or too freely. They were repeatedly submerged in freezing water until the drowning, then dragged up again. The process could go on for hours. Many drowned. Psychological torture was an art. Waterboarding techniques simulated drowning without physical damage. Sleep deprivation drove prisoners mad over days. Temperature shock, from burning heat to freezing cold, destabilized minds. These weren't random cruelties. They were backed by manuals, written by scholars and clergy, full of diagrams and best practices. Torture became a science, applied by professionals trained not to feel, only to extract. And behind it all, the greatest horror, dungeon design itself. These places were intentionally built to crush hope. Narrow walls, no light, no air, sound amplifying acoustics, floors that shifted, hidden spikes, doors that never opened. Architecture became a weapon. Famous dungeons like the Tower of London, Bastille, Castle St. Angelo, and Chateau de Vincennes each developed signature horrors and shared them. Torture knowledge became institutional pride. Cruelty became a career path. And the terrifying truth? All of this was legal, authorized, justified, sometimes even celebrated. You won't read this in most textbooks. But this is history. Not a tale of monsters, but of people, ordinary people, who built a world where cruelty was systematized, scaled, and sustained for centuries.